Ma'am, I need you to calm down and step away from the military officer immediately. That's what the police officer said to Victoria Hartwell, our HOA president, on the day she called 911 because she thought my wife was a threat to our community. Victoria stood there clutching her clipboard, face flushed red, pointing directly at my wife who was wearing her navy dress uniform covered in ribbons and medals. But there was one crucial detail Victoria didn't know about Commander Sarah Thompson. She had just called the cops to confront someone who literally had the authority to give orders to every single officer in this police department. But to understand how everything spiraled to this insane confrontation, I need to take you back to where it all began. Because the truth about Victoria Hartwell is darker than anyone in our neighborhood could have imagined. Before I dive into this story, I'm genuinely curious about something. How many of you have encountered people like Victoria in your own lives? Those individuals who think a tiny bit of authority gives them the right to control everyone around them? If you've got similar experiences with power-hungry neighbors or officials, drop your stories in the comments below. Sometimes just knowing you're not alone in dealing with these situations gives you the strength to finally stand up to the bullies. Now let me tell you exactly how this whole nightmare unfolded. My name is Marcus Thompson, and 3 months ago, my wife and I believed we'd discovered paradise. Willowbrook Gardens appeared to be the perfect upscale community, complete with manicured lawns that looked like golf course greens, pristine white picket fences, and residents who seemed genuinely friendly when they waved from their front porches. This was supposed to be the place where my wife, Commander Sarah Thompson, could finally relax and decompress after 15 years of dedicated naval service that had taken her to every corner of the globe. The neighborhood had everything we'd dreamed about during those long deployment separations: tree-lined streets where children could ride bicycles safely, a community center with activities for military families, and homeowners who proudly displayed American flags in their front yards. It felt like the kind of place where Sarah's service would be respected and appreciated, where we could build the stable home life that had been interrupted by so many military obligations and overseas assignments. But looking back now, I realized there was something I completely missed during those first few weeks. The residents weren't actually friendly at all. They were terrified, walking on eggshells, constantly glancing over their shoulders like they expected to be watched and judged for every minor imperfection in their daily routines. That's when I first encountered Victoria Hartwell, the woman who would nearly destroy our lives. At 58 years old, Victoria had served as president of the Willowbrook Gardens HOA for 8 consecutive years, ruling over the community with an iron fist disguised as polite concern for property values. She had perfectly straightened blonde hair that never seemed to move in the wind, pastel business suits that were always freshly pressed, and a smile that never quite reached her cold, calculating eyes. When I first met Victoria during her welcome visit to our home, my initial thought was admiration for her dedication. Her own house looked like something from a home design magazine, with not a single blade of grass out of place, flowers arranged in geometrically perfect patterns, and windows that sparkled like crystal in the sunlight. She seemed like the kind of neighbor who took genuine pride in maintaining community standards and helping everyone achieve their best. But Dr. Patricia Moore, our 73-year-old neighbor who lived in the modest ranch house next door, whispered something to me that should have been a warning. She wasn't always like this. "Marcus." "Doctor," Moore said, glancing nervously toward Victoria's house. Something happened to change her. Something that made her different, more controlling, more angry. At the time, I dismissed it as typical neighborhood gossip, the kind of idle speculation that happens in any close-knit community. I had no idea how prophetic those words would prove to be. Everything changed when Sarah received her deployment orders to spend 6 months aboard the USS Truman, leaving me alone in our oversized house that suddenly felt empty and hollow without her presence. That's when I started noticing the signs that something was seriously wrong with our perfect neighborhood paradise. Victoria began appearing at the most peculiar times, always carrying her official HOA clipboard and that small black notebook she constantly scribbled in. She would materialize whenever I forgot to bring the garbage cans in immediately after pickup, when autumn leaves dared to fall on our pristine lawn, or when I parked my car 2 inches closer to the curb than the community guidelines technically allowed. Her timing was so precise, it seemed like she was conducting surveillance on every household, cataloging infractions and building cases against residents who stepped even slightly out of line. But here's what struck me as genuinely bizarre. Victoria never actually issued me any violations during those 6 months. She would document everything meticulously in that black notebook, taking photographs from multiple angles and making detailed written observations, but she never followed through with the formal citations that other neighbors seemed to receive regularly for similar minor infractions. I couldn't understand her strategy until Sarah finally returned home. And then Victoria's true intentions became crystal clear in the most disturbing way possible. March 17th was supposed to be the happiest day we'd had in months. I spent the entire morning preparing for Sarah's homecoming, hanging a welcome banner across our front porch, arranging her favorite red roses throughout the house, and cooking the special dinner she'd been craving during those long months at sea. I kept checking my phone obsessively, counting down the minutes until I could hold my wife again and resume the normal life that military deployments always put on hold. When Sarah's Navy sedan pulled into our driveway at exactly 2:30 that afternoon, my heart nearly exploded with pure joy and relief. She stepped out wearing her dress uniform, complete with all the ribbons and medals that represented 15 years of exemplary service, promotions earned through competence and leadership, and countless sacrifices made for our country's security. Even after 6 months apart, Sarah carried herself with that unmistakable military bearing that commanded respect wherever she went. The confidence that comes from successfully leading others through challenging situations most civilians can't even imagine. We had barely embraced for 5 minutes, still holding each other tight and whispering about how much we'd missed being together, when Victoria appeared on our doorstep like a storm cloud blocking out the sun. "Mr. Thompson," she said in that artificially sweet tone that always made my skin crawl, "I'm terribly sorry to interrupt this reunion, but we have a significant code violation that requires immediate attention." She was already measuring our welcome banner with professional precision, muttering calculations under her breath and making notes on her clipboard like she was documenting evidence of a serious crime. Sarah, still wearing her full Navy uniform with commander's insignia clearly visible, looked at Victoria with the kind of calm assessment she'd use to evaluate a potential security threat. "Ma'am, we'll adjust it immediately to comply with community standards," she responded with diplomatic professionalism, showing the kind of restraint that comes from years of dealing with difficult people in high-stress situations. But Victoria wasn't looking at the banner that she claimed violated HOA regulations. Her eyes were fixed on the ribbons and medals adorning Sarah's chest, studying each one like she was trying to decode their meaning and significance. "A commander," she whispered, and I swear I saw something dark and predatory flash across her face for just a split second before she regained her composure. That brief moment should have been my warning about what was coming next. But I was too focused on celebrating Sarah's safe return to recognize the signs of the psychological warfare campaign that Victoria was about to launch against our family. Over the next 3 weeks, Victoria attacked us with the systematic precision of a military operation designed to break down enemy morale and resistance. Week 1 brought a $75 fine for allegedly placing our garbage cans in the wrong position on collection day. Week 2 escalated to a $150 violation for what she claimed was unauthorized exterior paint color, even though we hadn't painted anything since moving in. Week 3 brought a $200 citation for excessive noise disturbance because Sarah went for her morning run at 6 a.m., something she'd done every single day for the past decade, without a single complaint from any previous neighbors. But there was something deeply unsettling about Victoria's approach that went beyond typical HOA enforcement. After each violation, she would ask seemingly innocent questions about Sarah's military rank and responsibilities. "Commander is quite a high position, isn't it?" she would inquire with fake curiosity. "Does a commander have authority over many people?" These weren't casual conversation starters. They were intelligence-gathering missions, probing for information about Sarah's career and status within the military hierarchy. The psychological impact of Victoria's campaign became evident when I found Sarah sitting alone in our garage that Thursday evening, staring at her service medals with an expression of defeat I'd never seen before. My confident, accomplished wife, who had successfully led hundreds of sailors through complex operations, was questioning everything about herself and her place in civilian society. "Marcus," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "maybe I really don't belong here. Maybe I only know how to function in a military environment where rules make sense and authority is earned through competence rather than politics." The doubt in her voice broke my heart. because I could see that Victoria's systematic harassment was achieving its intended goal of making Sarah feel unwelcome and out of place in her own home. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly who Victoria Hartwell really was and what drove her obsessive need to target military families in our community. What I discovered through my investigation would explain her behavior in ways that were both shocking and deeply disturbing. But before I could share my findings with Sarah, a phone call arrived that would escalate our situation from neighborhood harassment to something much more serious and potentially career-threatening. The call came at 11:15 p.m. from an unlisted number that immediately put me on high alert. "Mr. Thompson, this is Captain Rodriguez from the Naval Criminal Investigative Service. We need to speak with you about an investigation concerning your wife." My blood turned to ice as the implications of those words sank in. "What kind of investigation?" I managed to ask, though my voice sounded distant and hollow in my own ears. "Someone has filed a formal complaint regarding Commander Thompson's behavior since returning from deployment. They've expressed concerns about her psychological state and potential risk to community safety." Captain Rodriguez explained in the matter-of-fact tone that military officials use when delivering serious news. "The person who filed this report is Victoria Hartwell." The pieces of Victoria's strategy suddenly fell into place with terrifying clarity. She wasn't just harassing us with petty HOA violations. She was systematically building a case to destroy Sarah's military career by manipulating official channels and exploiting the military's serious approach to handling reports about officer conduct and mental health. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor who would provide crucial information about Victoria's true identity and motivation. Dr. Patricia Moore knocked on our door carrying a thick box of documents. Her hands trembling with what appeared to be a combination of fear and determination. "Marcus, you need to know the truth about Victoria," she said, glancing nervously over her shoulder as if she expected to be caught revealing classified information. Dr. Moore opened the box to reveal dozens of photographs, official documents, military records, and incident reports that painted a completely different picture of our HOA president than the one she presented to the community. Victoria was a colonel in the Army. "Dr. Moore began, her voice dropping to a whisper. "She was forced into early retirement 10 years ago for abuse of authority and systematic harassment of subordinates. The military conducted a full investigation after multiple complaints about her leadership style and treatment of junior officers. The emotional depth of Victoria's story began to emerge as Dr. Plaiston Moore continued sharing the documents. The forced retirement destroyed her life completely. Her husband, who was a general, divorced her because the scandal damaged his own career prospects. Her adult daughter cut off all contact, unable to handle the shame and embarrassment of her mother's disgrace. Victoria lost her military pension, her social status, her family, and her entire identity in one devastating blow. But the most disturbing revelation came next. What makes Victoria truly dangerous, Dr. Moore explained, is that she blames other military personnel for her downfall. She believes that if she had been male, or if she had served in a different era, her leadership style would have been accepted rather than criticized. She's convinced that the military betrayed her after 20 years of dedicated service. Dr. Moore's documentation revealed a chilling pattern that explained Victoria's obsessive targeting of military families in our community. 2019. Major Williams and his family were forced to relocate after Victoria orchestrated a campaign of harassment that included false reports to Child Protective Services. 2021. Captain Jackson's marriage fell apart under the pressure of constant violations and community ostracization orchestrated by Victoria. 2023. Lieutenant Commander Davis was admitted to a mental health facility after suffering a breakdown caused by Victoria's psychological warfare tactics. The pattern was unmistakable and terrifying. Every victim had been a military family, where the service member held a rank equal to or higher than Victoria's former position as colonel. She was methodically targeting successful military personnel out of jealousy and revenge, using her position as HOA president to destroy the careers and families that reminded her of everything she had lost. And now, Dr. Moore said, looking directly into my eyes, Sarah is her next target. A commander with 15 years of exemplary service and a spotless record represents everything Victoria believes was unfairly taken from her. As I processed this information, I realized that Victoria had already moved beyond petty harassment into something much more dangerous. By involving the Naval Criminal Investigative Service, she was attempting to use the military's own systems against Sarah, exploiting their commitment to thoroughly investigating any reports of concerning behavior from military personnel. The stakes had escalated far beyond neighborhood politics or HOA violations. Victoria was playing a long game designed to systematically destroy Sarah's career, reputation, and mental health using the same tactics that had successfully driven other military families from our community. But she had no idea that her latest target was about to fight back with the full resources and strategic thinking of someone trained to handle much more dangerous enemies than a disgraced former colonel with a clipboard and a grudge. What happened next would test everything Sarah had learned about leadership, strategy, and psychological warfare during her 15 years of naval service. Because Victoria was about to discover that some battles can't be won through manipulation and intimidation, especially when you're fighting someone who understands exactly how those tactics work and has the competence to counter them effectively. The real war was just beginning, and Victoria had seriously underestimated her opponent. The next morning, Victoria appeared at our front door with what looked like a full legal team. Behind her stood 2 men in expensive suits and a professional-looking woman carrying a leather briefcase. "Mr. Thompson," Victoria announced with cold satisfaction. "This is Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a licensed military psychologist. She'll be conducting a mandatory psychological evaluation of your wife per HOA community safety protocols." Sarah emerged from the kitchen, still in her workout clothes, but carrying herself with that unmistakable military bearing that never seemed to diminish regardless of what she was wearing. "I'm not required to participate in any evaluation requested by civilian authorities," she stated calmly, her training allowing her to maintain composure even when facing obvious provocation. Victoria's smile widened with what appeared to be genuine pleasure at Sarah's resistance. "Unfortunately, Commander, the HOA board has voted unanimously to require mental health assessments for residents displaying concerning behavior patterns. According to our community bylaws, failure to comply results in immediate violation proceedings and potential removal from the neighborhood." Dr. Walsh stepped forward with professional demeanor. "Commander Thompson, this is simply a standard evaluation to ensure community safety. The process is completely confidential, but something felt wrong." Dr. Walsh's questions weren't following any standard psychological assessment protocol. Instead, she seemed to be fishing for specific responses that could be used against Sarah later. "Commander Thompson, have you ever felt that your superior officers treated you unfairly?" Dr. Walsh asked, taking detailed notes on every word. "Have you experienced thoughts of revenge against anyone who wronged you? Do you feel that civilian authorities don't understand the sacrifices military personnel make for their country?" These weren't questions designed to assess post-traumatic stress or deployment adjustment issues. They were leading questions carefully crafted to elicit responses that could be twisted into evidence of psychological instability or potential violence. Sarah's military intelligence training kicked in immediately as she recognized the manipulation tactics being used against her. "Dr. Walsh," Sarah interrupted, her voice sharp with sudden awareness. "These questions aren't part of any legitimate PTSD screening. They're specifically designed to generate quotable responses that could be taken out of context to suggest emotional instability or anti-authority sentiment." Victoria's confident expression flickered for just a moment before she regained control. "Commander, your paranoid interpretation of standard psychological questions is exactly the kind of concerning behavior that prompted this evaluation in the first place." While this psychological ambush was happening, I quietly stepped into the kitchen to call Detective Mike Sullivan, my friend since college. "Mike, I need you to run a background check on Dr. Jennifer Walsh. She claims to be a licensed military psychologist, but something feels off." 20 minutes later, Mike called back with chilling information. "Marcus, there's no Dr. Jennifer Walsh licensed to practice psychology in this state. The only doctor personed. Jennifer Walsh, who specialized in military psychology, died 3 years ago in Oregon. Victoria had hired a fake psychologist to create a fraudulent evaluation report that could be used to destroy Sarah's military career. The scope of her deception and manipulation was more extensive and calculated than I had imagined possible from someone operating under the guise of community leadership. I rushed back into the living room to alert Sarah about the fake credentials. But before I could speak, the sound of multiple police sirens filled our quiet neighborhood. Through our front window, I watched as 3 patrol cars surrounded our house, officers emerging with the kind of tactical awareness that suggested they believed they were responding to a serious threat. Marcus Thompson, step away from the house with your hands visible. The commanding voice belonged to Sergeant James Mitchell, a stern-looking officer I'd never encountered before who approached our front door with obvious caution and suspicion. Victoria positioned herself behind the police officers like she was seeking protection from dangerous criminals. Officers, thank you for responding so quickly. I called because I'm genuinely concerned about the safety of our community. Commander Thompson has been displaying increasingly erratic and aggressive behavior patterns that suggest serious psychological deterioration. She presented a thick folder containing what appeared to be comprehensive evidence of Sarah's alleged instability. Audio recordings that had clearly been edited to remove context, photographs taken from misleading angles, and the fake psychological evaluation that painted Sarah as a potentially violent individual struggling with civilian reintegration. I have documented proof of threatening behavior, verbal aggression toward elderly residents, and psychological assessment results indicating severe adjustment disorders with potential for violence. Victoria declared with the confidence of someone who believed her elaborate deception was bulletproof. For a moment, even I began to doubt what I was seeing. Victoria's evidence was so professionally presented and apparently thorough that it would have convinced most people that Sarah posed a genuine threat to community safety. The audio recordings sounded authentic. The photographs appeared damning, and the psychological report carried official letterhead that looked legitimate. Sergeant Mitchell studied the documentation with the careful attention of an experienced law enforcement officer who had learned not to make quick judgments about complex situations. But Victoria had made one crucial mistake in her planning. She had assumed that all police officers would automatically defer to civilian complaints without conducting their own professional assessment of the situation. Sarah stepped out of our house wearing her workout clothes, but there was nothing casual about her demeanor. Despite being dressed for exercise rather than military duty, she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to command responsibility and high-stakes decision-making. Officers, I am Commander Sarah Thompson, United States Navy, she announced with the clear authority of someone who had spent 15 years leading others through challenging situations. I request immediate verification of the identity and credentials of all parties involved in this situation, as well as official documentation of any complaints filed against me through proper military channels. The transformation in Sergeant Mitchell's demeanor was immediate and dramatic. His entire posture shifted from cautious law enforcement to respectful military courtesy, as his own service background recognized the authority and professionalism Sarah projected. Ma'am, Sergeant James Mitchell, Army Rangers, 12 years active duty, before transitioning to civilian law enforcement. He responded with obvious respect for Sarah's rank and bearing. I'll be happy to verify all information and ensure this situation is handled appropriately. Sarah continued with the kind of strategic thinking that had made her an effective naval commander. Sergeant, I request that you contact the Naval Criminal Investigative Service to verify my service record and cross-reference any official complaints that may have been filed against me through proper military justice channels. For the first time since this nightmare began, I saw genuine uncertainty cross Victoria's face. Her carefully constructed plan depended on local police officers accepting her evidence at face value without conducting independent verification through military authorities who would have access to Sarah's actual service record. Any legitimate complaints. The NCIS callback came 15 minutes later, and Sergeant Mitchell's expression grew increasingly grim as he listened to the information being provided by military investigators. When he ended the call, his professional demeanor had shifted to something much more serious and focused. Mrs. Hartwell, I need to inform you that there are no official complaints against Commander Thompson in any military database. However, NCIS has flagged your name in connection with multiple attempts to manipulate the military justice system through false allegations against active duty personnel. The devastating revelation continued as Sergeant Mitchell shared additional information from the military investigators. Furthermore, the doctor, Jennifer Walsh, you claim to have hired for this psychological evaluation died 3 years ago. Whoever this woman is, she's not a licensed psychologist. and any evaluation she conducted is fraudulent. Victoria's carefully constructed facade finally cracked under the weight of evidence that exposed her systematic deception and manipulation. "I served this country for 20 years, she screamed, her professional composure completely dissolving into raw emotional breakdown. 20 years of dedicated service. And they destroyed my career over a few complaints from soldiers who weren't tough enough to handle real military leadership." The real Victoria Hartwell emerged in that moment of complete psychological collapse. "These people," she said, pointing accusingly at Sarah, "they get respect, honor, retirement benefits, and community admiration while I lost everything for trying to maintain proper military standards. They kicked me out and destroyed my life because I demanded excellence from my subordinates." Her confession revealed the depth of resentment and twisted logic that had driven her campaign against military families in our community. Victoria genuinely believed that her forced retirement was unjust, and she had spent years taking revenge on successful military personnel who reminded her of everything she felt had been unfairly taken away. As word spread about Victoria's arrest, community members finally found courage to speak up about their own experiences with her harassment. The Johnsons revealed threats of false Child Protective Services reports. The Garcia family exposed how Victoria questioned their business licenses. The elderly Kowalskis admitted Victoria had delayed emergency medical response by filing noise complaints during medical emergencies. Victoria's abuse of HOA authority extended far beyond targeting military families. She had systematically intimidated anyone who showed independence or challenged her control over community life, creating an atmosphere of fear that prevented good people from supporting each other or standing up to her bullying tactics. The criminal charges against Victoria were extensive and serious, filing multiple false police reports, impersonating licensed professionals, conducting fraud related to HOA authority, and systematically harassing protected classes including military families and elderly residents. The evidence we had gathered, combined with testimony from numerous victims spanning several years, created one of the most comprehensive cases of HOA-related criminal activity that prosecutors had ever encountered. Victoria's attempts to claim she was the real victim were thoroughly discredited by audio recordings that captured her own voice making threats, financial records showing misuse of community funds for personal vendettas, and witness testimony that revealed her true character as a calculating predator who had deliberately targeted vulnerable families for psychological destruction. 3 months later, our community was transformed. The new HOA board, led by Dr. Patricia Moore, focused on actual community building rather than intimidation. Their first action was reversing all fines from Victoria's tenure and issuing formal apologies to targeted families. The ripple effects extended beyond our neighborhood. Veterans organizations thanked Sarah for standing up to civilian bullying affecting military families regionally. Media coverage inspired other communities to protect military families from similar harassment. Standing on our front porch during a perfect sunset 6 months after that terrifying confrontation, Sarah and I watched as a moving truck pulled into Victoria's former house. The new residents turned out to be another military family, with the husband serving as a Navy captain who had specifically chosen our community because of its newfound reputation for supporting and honoring military service members. "Marcus," Sarah said, watching the American flag wave gently in the evening breeze. "This experience taught me that defending freedom doesn't end when you remove your uniform. Sometimes protecting people means standing up to bullies and abusers right here in our own neighborhoods. Using the same courage and strategic thinking we apply to overseas missions." As the new military family began settling into their home, I realized that Victoria's campaign of hatred and revenge had ultimately failed completely. Instead of driving military families away from our community, her actions had transformed Willowbrook Gardens into a place where service to country was genuinely honored and protected. The final victory came when Captain Williams personally thanked Sarah. "Commander, what you did here will benefit military families for years to come. You proved that real courage means standing up for what's right. Sometimes the most important battles aren't fought on distant battlefields. They happen in your own backyard against bullies who disguise cruelty as community standards. The greatest service you can provide is ensuring the freedoms our military protects overseas are equally defended right here at home."